right. Well, I'm glad that you are gathered here today. And if you're joining us online, we're welcoming you here as well. Glad that you're tuning in, I guess you could say, and watching us on Facebook Live. And if at all possible, try to get here in person. We would love to see you and connect with you. It really is a better experience for all of us if you can be here with us live. But if you can't, we understand, and we're glad that you're watching and watching online. I want to start by talking this morning about an Old Testament story in the book of 2 Kings. If you would turn there, please. 2 Kings chapter 5. This is an unusual story. And while you're turning there, it's about a man named Naaman or something like that. And we're going to read about Naaman. Just a weird little story kind of tucked in the middle of the Old Testament during the days of, I believe it is Elisha or Elijah. I'm not sure which one. We'll see in a second. Yeah, it's Elisha. And this man, Naaman, I'll just read the passage, and you'll see this is an interesting story here. In verse 1, it says, "Now Naaman, the captain of the army of the king of Aram, was a great man with his master and highly respected, because by him the Lord had given victory to Aram. The man was also a valiant warrior, but he was a leper." Now the Arameans had gone out in bands and had taken captive a little girl from the land of Israel, and she waited on Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "Oh, I wish that my master were with the prophet who is in Samaria. Then he would cure him of his leprosy." Naaman went in and told his master, saying, "Thus and thus spoke the girl who is from the land of Israel." And then the king of Aram said, "Go now, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel." He departed and took with him 10 talents of silver and 6,000 shekels of gold and 10 changes of clothes. He brought the letter to the king of Israel, saying, "And now, as this letter comes to you, behold, I have sent Naaman, my servant, to you, that you may cure him of his leprosy." When the king of Israel read this letter, he tore his clothes. And he said, "Oh, am I God to kill and to make alive, that this man is sending word to me to cure a man of his leprosy? But consider now and see how he is seeking a quarrel against me." Verse 8, "It happened when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, that he sent word to the king, saying, 'Why have you torn your clothes? Now let him come to me, and he shall know that there is a prophet in Israel.' So Naaman came with his horses and his chariots and stood at the doorway of the house of Elijah." You could just hear that, right? Here we are. Right? Elisha, verse 10, sent a messenger to him saying, "Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh will be restored to you, and you will be clean." But Naaman was furious and went away and said, "Behold, I thought he will surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God and wave his hand over the place and cure the leper. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean?" So he turned and went away in a rage. Well, then his servants came near and spoke to him and said, My father, had the prophet told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more then when he says to you, 'Wash and be clean'?" Right? Verse 14, "So he went down and he dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of God. And his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean." May God add his blessing to the reading of his word. So do you see what happened there? Very interesting little story, right? This little servant girl, she had been captured by these foreign invaders, probably, I don't know if her parents had been killed or something in the fighting, and so they took her as a captive, as a servant, a slave, and she was just talking about, oh, man, my master, he's such a great guy, your husband, but, man, I wish he could just get rid of that leprosy. We have a prophet in Samaria. That prophet would heal him. So they sent a letter, right, to the king of Israel going, hey, can you, here, fix my general, will you? And the king is like, no, he wants to pick a fight. This is a battle for war. This is a weird mind game. I'm in trouble. He's going to attack me. He's already been attacking the outlying villages. This is a full-on war coming my way. And he tears his clothes because it's impossible what he's been asked to do. Elisha hears about it, the prophet, and he says, what? Why are you upset? Send him to me. There's a prophet in Israel. He'll find out. So he goes to him, and he tells him, sends out a messenger, right? He's all in the pomp and circumstance of a foreign commander of thousands. And he doesn't even go outside. He just says, oh, go see that guy. Like, he's important, right? That'd be like if a 4-star general of the United States of America, right, of the Army or something, decided to come to my house and was waiting at the front door. And I sent a kid, like a messenger. Hey, go tell him this is what I'm saying. I don't even come to see him, right? So insulting, so embarrassing. But then he says, go wash in the Jordan River. Just, right? It'd be like me saying, go take a dip over in the Cucaholen River. Right? Just it's not the mighty Euphrates. It's not these big rivers. It's just a little river. Go. And he's furious. He says, oh, forget this. What an insult. And he walks away. But his servant said, if he asked you to do something amazing, wouldn't you have done it? If he said to go climb this mountain and pick this fruit from the, you would do it. So why not just do this? This is so easy, so simple. So he does, and he goes and he takes a dip, and 7 times, and he's cured, and it works. I think this is a picture of salvation. This is a picture of salvation from God. For some reason, in our minds, we cannot accept grace and mercy from God. The average person, we cannot accept that this is that easy, that there's nothing we can really do. You can't contribute in any way to your own salvation. You just have to stay put, right? Just believe that Jesus has already done it for you. It is nothing you can do on your own. You cannot earn your own salvation. You cannot save yourself. Only God can do it. Only by the power of Jesus Christ and what he did on the cross and in his life. So now go back to Romans chapter 10. Okay, turn to Romans chapter 10, verses 1 through 7. A couple weeks ago, we were in Romans chapter 10. This was before we took a break for mental health. We took a mental health break. There you go. We did mental health for about 3 weeks, and we talked about, mental health and mental illness and the stigma attached to it and how to get mental health, and that is through, prayer with supplication and thanksgiving, also valuing and thinking about these good things, giving, sharing, all these wonderful things. So now today we are coming back to Romans chapter 10. We were in Romans chapter 9 a while back and really just going through that wonderful, great chapter. And the charge to Paul was, right, the people of the Roman church said, you don't like us, especially the Jews, right? The Gentiles there were Jews and Gentiles that were in the Roman church. All the Jews got kicked out of Rome for a while because they were misbehaving, and this included the Christian Jews. So then they got allowed back into the city of Rome. Unfortunately for them, in the meantime, the Roman church, not a lot of Jews got saved because there weren't many Jews there, but still they weren't being saved even at home, but, in Jerusalem. But all these Gentiles showed up. It grew. Lots of people had been saved, and now the tension between Jew and Gentile was reaching a boiling point. So Paul writes the letter of Romans to say, you guys, there's no difference between Jew and Gentile. It's the same God. This is the God of all. So he's going to describe everything to him. And he really, in verse 9, or chapter 9, is going to say, because people were saying to him, Paul hates Jews. That's why there's so many Gentiles being saved. He's overlooking us in the message of the gospel. And he really needs to do more to reach out to the Jews, and he needs to ignore those Gentiles so that more of our people get saved in Jesus. Right? And Paul is saying, I love the Jews. I am a Jew. And that's what chapter 9 is all about. Why aren't the Jews being saved? He says there's lots of reasons. And he comes down and he says there's problems with Israel. We've got some issues. Why not Israel? Well, first of all, Israel will be saved, right? The remnant will be saved. They will come back to him, but not right now. And I'm praying that they will be. So now we're in chapter 10, verses 1 through 7, when he says, brothers and sisters, right? That's implied there. Brethren, my heart's desire and my prayer to God for them is for their salvation. For I testify about them that they have a zeal for God, but not in accordance with knowledge. For not knowing about God's righteousness and seeking to establish their own, they did not subject themselves to the righteousness of God. For Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone who believes. For Moses writes that the man who practices the righteousness which is based on law shall live by that righteousness. But the righteousness based on faith speaks as follows: Do not say in your heart who will ascend into heaven. That is to bring Christ down. Or who will descend into the abyss. That is to bring Christ up from the dead. Okay, so this is what we're going to talk about today, but I'm going to continue on for a little bit so you see. This is absolutely my favorite section in the whole Bible. This is my favorite in the whole Bible. And we're going to talk about it next week, and I can't wait to get there. But we have to talk through verses 1 through 7 now, which builds up to it so you understand it more. But in verse 8, but what does it say? Right, the righteousness based on faith. What does it say? The word is near you. It's in your mouth and in your heart. That is the word of faith which we are preaching. That if you confess with your mouth, Jesus is Lord, right? And believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For with the heart a person believes, resulting in righteousness, and with the mouth he confesses, resulting in salvation. For the scripture says, whoever believes in him will not be disappointed. For there is no distinction between Jew and Greek. Right? For the same Lord is Lord of all, abounding in riches for all who call on him. Verse 13, for whoever will call on the name of the Lord will be saved. That is the best verse in the entire scripture. Whoever will call on the name of the Lord will be saved. You could take that to eternity. Take that to the bank. This is where it is. So let's talk about verses 1 through 7. Right? I just have so much joy and excitement over this section. I honestly cannot believe I've never preached on it. And I've taught it to dozens, probably hundreds of individuals as I've talked to them about salvation, but I've never preached a sermon on it. So I'm excited to do that. The first thing we're going to talk about is there are some problems with Israel. Why they're not being saved. Why isn't Israel repenting of their sins and coming to faith in Jesus and being saved? Why isn't that happening? And then the second thing we're going to talk about is, well, if Israel's got it wrong, what's a white way? If Israel's got it wrong, what is the right way? What is God's way of righteousness? Okay? All right, so the first thing, number one, right, the first section here, there are 5 problems with Israel that Paul brings up. Israel's not being saved. You could see it They are not turning to Jesus Christ. You would look at Israel even today, and if I ask the question, is Israel a Christian nation? No. No. They are not. Not even today. Let me ask this. Will Israel one day become a Christian nation? Oh, yes. I pray to God that they will, just like Paul does here. And it will happen. A remnant will be saved, and they will turn to him. But there are 5 problems with Israel. First one, number 1, in Paul's day, and even in today, number 1, they weren't being saved. They weren't being saved. They were not coming to Jesus Christ in faith. Right? They were not repenting of their sins. They were not coming to him in faith. They weren't being saved. In verse 1, brethren, my heart's desire and my prayer to God for them is for their salvation. Again, he's just reinforcing how much he loves Israel. He said, I genuinely want them to be saved. Now, keep in mind, these are the people that are beating Paul a lot of times. They are arresting him. They are chasing him from city to city. In fact, when he goes even to the Gentile cities, they send people to those other cities to chase Paul out of them. They don't want Paul to have any peace whatsoever. They're really against Paul, and they want him to stop preaching about Jesus. And he's saying, my heart's desire is for, and my prayer to God for them is for their salvation. I love them. I wish that they would get saved. You know, you ever have an enemy? Anybody ever have an enemy? I had some people that I really don't like, and I would say, man, especially when I was younger in high school, right? Like, man, that guy's kind of my enemy. I don't like that guy. He's a jerk. He gives me grief. For why? No real reason. One time a guy was bullying me, and he was bigger than I am. Or I was, not I am. He was bigger than I was, and he was just picking on me for I couldn't figure it out. Just was mean, just calling me name. He literally, as I was on my bike, he picked up my bike with me on it. This was a big kid. Threw me into the road in front of a car. Car had to swerve, right? Why? And I would not think, boy, I hope that guy gets saved. At the time, I was like, oh, that guy's going to get it. Just wait till the tribulation, man. You're going to get it. But not Paul. I mean, Paul is going through this abuse from these people and trying to kill him. And he's like, oh, I hope they get saved. I pray and I hope that for their salvation. Nowadays, I do hope that guy gets saved. Yeah, you can pray for him. His name was Mark. I don't know. Last I saw him, he was not bigger than me. So, yeah. But that's his desire and his prayer. But they weren't being saved, and that was their problem. And that was a huge offensive blow to the Jews. What do you mean that the children of God are not saved? What do you mean that the people of God are not the people of God? How can you say that Israel is not right with the Lord? This is a blow. This is a huge thing. And that comes to our second problem that he has with Israel, that Israel has, and that is that they had zeal without knowledge. They have zeal without knowledge. Number 2, which is in verse 2. He says, because I testify about them that they have a zeal for God, but not in accordance with knowledge. So what does zeal mean? Who knows what zeal means? Enthusiasm, right? Zeal, almost like jealousy, but not quite. When Jesus was so upset, he looked in the temple, right, and people were turning it into a marketplace and gouging people and stealing. He had zeal. Zeal, he was just like, this is my God's house. You've turned it into a den of thieves. And he was so like, boom! He threw the temple, he flipped over the tables of the money changers. He made a whip and he whipped the people to get them out of there. so on fire for God, but Jesus had that zeal for God in accordance with knowledge, right? These people, Israel, did not have zeal in accordance with knowledge, which means they were all worked up, super excited, but they didn't know what they were doing. It's like the best runner in the world, right? What's the guy from Jamaica, the fastest runner ever? What's his, Usain Bolt, right? It's like him trying to run 100 meters, but he doesn't know where the start is or the finish is, right? And just ready, set, go. And okay. He doesn't know when to get, how fast, how far. That's zeal with no knowledge, no direction. It's like the person trying to score a touchdown, but they go in the wrong direction. They score for the other team. You ever seen that? It doesn't work. And this is our third problem with Israel. Why? How do you say they have zeal but no knowledge? Well, this is number 3 here. They didn't know God's righteousness. That's the lack of knowledge. They didn't know God's righteousness, which is in verse 3. For not knowing about God's righteousness and seeking to establish their own, they did not subject themselves to the righteousness of God. So they didn't know God's righteousness. That's the lack of knowledge, right? They didn't know God's way of being declared right. That's what righteous is, right? Right? That's God saying you are in the right. What you're doing is the right thing to do. What you did is the right thing to do. God will declare a person righteous because of a certain thing. And Israel didn't have the true knowledge of God's righteousness. They thought differently. They thought they could earn that righteousness from God, which is our fourth problem. They sought to establish their own righteousness. Not God's way of doing things, their own way. They thought they knew better than God, so they would take a commandment like, thou shalt not kill, right? You shall not murder. And they said, well, what did God mean by that? Well, I don't know. Let's figure this out. Yeah, I'm pretty sure God means that, we can hit people, we can call them names, we can hate them in our hearts. Just don't kill them. As long as you don't kill them, we're fulfilling God's righteousness. Right? They thought that was their own, they thought that was God's righteousness, but really God was saying, no. When I say don't kill anyone, I mean don't even be angry with them. Don't call them a name. Don't, it's the whole spectrum. That's God's righteousness. Love each other. Love your neighbor as yourself. You see the difference. They didn't know God's righteousness. He says, don't commit adultery. And they go, okay, we can do everything right up until that point. Oh, no. Don't even think about it, God is saying. So they established their own righteousness. And he said, don't work on the Sabbath. And they said, well, what does work mean? Well, how about you can carry this, but not that? Well, and they break it all down and they mess it all up. So they sought to establish their own righteousness. They sought to, declare themselves righteous. And that leads to our fifth problem with Israel. They did not subject themselves to God's righteousness. Right? It's not just that they didn't know it, but they refused to come under his righteousness. In verse 3, not knowing about God's righteousness is seeking to establish their own. They did not subject themselves to the righteousness of God. Well, what is the righteousness of God? This is our second major point, right? And there's 4 things here. What is the righteousness of God? What is God's righteousness? Well, first of all, the first thing you need to know about God's righteousness is that Christ already did it. God's righteousness is Jesus fulfilled the law. Jesus was your righteousness. He's the end of the law, the teleos. He is the fulfillment of the law. It's already done. Your bill has been paid. That's what he is saying here. And this is our second part here. What is God's righteousness? Number one, Christ fulfilled the law. Christ fulfilled the law. In verse 4, for Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone who believes. Right? And that's our second point. What is God's righteousness? Number two, it is faith-based. It is faith-based, not works-based. It is not based on the works of the law. It is faith-based. What does it say here? Christ is the end of the law, or the fulfillment of the law, for everyone who believes. It's all about faith in Jesus. It's not about how good you or I can be at following the law or any standard you want to put in there. The righteousness of God is about believing that God did it for you. That's the start. That's where it is. And that leads us to the fourth thing about God, or the third thing about God's righteousness is, number three, it is not law-based. It is faith-based, we just said, but it is not law-based. In verse 5, for Moses writes that the man who practices the righteousness which is based on law shall live by that righteousness. Right? It's like at the beginning of a game, and there's two ways to play this game. Way number one, a very detailed, complicated set of rules. Okay? 627 rules in this board game. And if you decide that you're going to go with route A, you have to live and follow every single one of those rules perfectly for the entire game. You can't opt out once you're in, right? If that's the way you want to win and play the game, you have to play the game that way. Or there's option B. Option B, much easier. We don't have to follow these rules. You just have to realize Jesus already beat the game. Here are the codes. And you just put them in. And you win. You win the game. There's a radio show program that my wife and I used to listen to in the car. I don't remember if it was a Christian station or not. But it was literally the name of the radio show was called Pick, See, and Win. Okay? That's what it was called. They literally said the name of this game is called Pick, See, and Win. Okay. So it would be a trivia question, and they would get callers. And they would say, what is the capital of Michigan? A, Bismarck. B, Detroit. C, Lansing. Or D, I don't know, Bay City. Right? The name of the game was literally Pick, See, and Win. You would not believe the number of callers. They would hear the answers, and they would go, I'm going to say B, Detroit. Ooh, I'm sorry, it was C, Lansing. The name of the game is Pick, See, and Win. Right? You get it? You understand? The answer is always C. And they kept missing it because they wanted to hear it for themselves and decide what they thought was right. And in the game, they're telling them the answer is C. No, I'm going to solve it. I want to hear that. I'll be the judge of what the answer is. The answer is C. Pick C and win. This is trying to establish our own righteousness. It's not law-based. It is faith-based. If you accept the terms, you will fail. Why? Because you don't get to pick and choose what laws you get to follow and what ones you don't. It's not law-based. And then number 4, the righteousness of God, God's righteousness, recognizes that God has already done everything. And this is in verses 6 and 7, where he says, and this is complicated, this is a little difficult, but the righteousness based on faith, which is God's righteousness, speaks as follows. Don't say in your heart, who will ascend into heaven, and that is to bring Christ down, or who will descend into the abyss, that is to bring Christ up from the dead. Right? So the true faith-based righteousness, God's righteousness, realizes that God's already done it. It's super easy to understand, to access. You don't have to climb a mountain to bring Christ down for the incarnation, because Christ already came down for the incarnation. You don't have to go into the abyss or cross the sea, in the original back to Deuteronomy, right? To bring Christ up from the dead, to resurrect him, because God already raised Christ from the dead. This is not difficult. It's pick, see, and win. Christ has already come down in the incarnation and became a man. He lived a perfect, sinless life. He died on a cross, and then God rose him from the dead. So you don't have to go down to the grave and bring him back out of the tomb. He's already risen. And that's what it says in verse 8. But what does it say? The word is near you, right? It's in your heart. It's in your mouth. And in your heart, that is the word of faith which we are preaching, that if you confess with your mouth, Jesus says, Lord, and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. See how that connects? The righteousness of God recognizes that God has already accomplished it. So what does that mean? Well, for us, what does that mean for you? What does that look like for you? Because it's like, oh, that's nice, Pastor. I'm glad that we do it right and we believe right. And the Jews don't, and we're sad about that. We're going to keep praying for them. But let me ask you 3 questions that are tough, and you can only answer them. Number 1, do you have zeal without knowledge? You yourself, not your spouse, not your parent, your grandparents. You. Do you have a zeal without knowledge for God? Are you so busy serving him that you don't have time for love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, or self-control? Are you so busy serving God and believing in him and praying and reading your Bible that you've forgotten how to be nice? Because that's not in accordance with knowledge. That's not living by the Spirit. That's a zeal without knowledge, right? Have you forgotten how to be loving? Have you forgotten how to have joy in the Lord? Because if you're a Christian and you're running around like a chicken with your head cut off, you have zeal but no knowledge. Get out of my way, I got to get these papers copied so we can have our children's program. Out of my way, we've got to get this business meeting going. Right? I don't have time to talk to you. I don't have time to be happy. I'm serving the Lord. And if I don't serve the Lord, it won't get done. That's a zeal without knowledge. That's an old school church zeal without knowledge. Right? Now, I will say this. Some of y'all, right, have knowledge but no zeal. Or you have no zeal and no knowledge. And you're just like, just like a bump on a log. The Jews were like fired up, ready to go in the wrong direction. Some of us are not even fired up. Drool. You got to have zeal, but you got to have it with knowledge in the right direction. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, and gentleness, and self-control. Number 2, do you seek to establish your own righteousness? Do you seek to establish your own righteousness? So maybe you say, well, I do have zeal, and it's according to the knowledge of God and the righteousness of God. But do you seek to establish your own righteousness? In other words, are you submitting yourself to the righteousness of God? We have to admit, God's way is what? He has already done it. Listen, you can bring nothing. I can bring nothing to salvation. I cannot add a single speck of any effort to God in his salvation of me and my soul. I don't care if I serve him all day, every day, for 100 years. I will not add a cent. I will not add anything to his salvation of me. Well, he saved you because you were going to do all these good things. No, that's not why. I don't add anything to it. I would be establishing my own righteousness if I, for some reason, believed that I contributed to my salvation. I cannot establish that. I would say this is very humbling, but I would say more than that, this is humiliating. And you have to accept it. Okay, I play chess on a weekly basis. I go to Midland, and I play chess with these guys and girls, and I get beat a lot. And I kind of thought of myself as a fairly smart or intelligent guy, right? And I'm playing these 7-year-old boys, twins, and they beat the snot out of me in chess. They are better than I am. They are good. And then I play other people. I play a 20-year-old lady. I play a 30-year-old man. And I played an 81-year-old man, and he beat me the other day. And it's not like they're younger and they're smarter. No, I get beat by old people too. And after a while, I mean, I do win sometimes, but let's say I didn't, right? After a while, it is so like, I just feel dumb. And it hurts. It hurts. But so think about that in terms of righteousness. But at least with chess, now I can go back and study and work harder and get better. And there's always going to be somebody better. But I can kind of hold my own after a while. Righteousness, it never gets better. Right? I get beat by God's standard every time, every day, and it never gets better. I am garbage on my own. My own righteousness is worse than garbage. It's filthy rags. And you adults, look up what that means. That is a pretty bad term, if you know what that is. Filthy rags, it says in the Bible. Do not seek to establish your own righteousness. Do we do that? And then number 3, do you refuse to subject yourself to the righteousness of God? You and I have to admit that we did nothing and can do nothing to warrant our salvation. You ever met a person too proud to accept certain things? Like a handout? We'll say assistance. But they'll say, no, I'm not going to accept that. I don't need that government assistance. That's a handout. Well, it's already been paid for you. No, I'm going to pay it myself. Okay. You ever met somebody like that? I have. They refuse, like, your bill's been paid. Yeah, but I'm going to pay it myself. Well, it costs everything you own, and then some. And you're going to be in debt forever, and you'll never pay it off. Well, I don't care. I'm still going to pay it. That's what it is to refuse to accept or subject yourself to the righteousness of God. We do the yard free here, right? And you should see people when they come in and they're like trying to figure out how much I can afford, if I can buy this, and we say, it's all free. They can't believe it. And then some people are like, no, I'm going to give you something. And what do we say? No, don't give us anything. It's free. You can't have it if you give us something. If you try to pay us, you can't have it. Instead, what do we say? Tell you what, if you really want to pay us back, come to church on Sunday. Oh, no. Because they don't want to be beholden, right? They don't want to be obligated. They don't like, I'm too independent for that. I'd rather give you money and walk away. I know you would. That's how it is with God. You can't do it yourself. You have to accept that you owe him, because you can't do it on your own. Next week, we're going to talk about this and the process of how someone actually gets saved. What do you believe? What do you say? It's so, so important. I hope you come ready to listen and hear and study ahead. I don't know. I don't know how much more I can say, so I won't say any more. Let's pray.